Hey kids, welcome to episode 4. And you know what that means. No more Jar Jar. I'm sorry, I'm just kidding. Jar Jar is everywhere in this video. But I want to start outside on the corner, so can you meet me there in about the length of the theme song? Keep it simple, bro. Now, I understand that somebody like me, using a word like bro in the title of something like this, gives bro about 45 more seconds before it ends up on the dung heap of forgotten slang like swell or gee whiz or amazeballs, which really should have died much sooner than it did. But I do want to talk today about simple sentences, and I brought you out here to the corner to show you the world's most ubiquitous simple sentence. Ubiquitous is a fancy word meaning it's everywhere, it's unavoidable, it's inescapable, kind of like the way students like to pull out their cell phones and text or message or snapgram or whatever it is that you do when you think we're not looking but we are looking and you know you're not supposed to be doing it. I'm not going to name any names, but you know who you are. So the world's most ubiquitous sentence, where is it? Well, it's been behind me and slightly above my head all along. It is the simple, humble stop sign. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Bullock, in the last episode you just told us that a simple sentence is one independent clause. And you also told us that a clause has to have a verb and its subject. Well, stop most definitely is a verb. There's no question about that. But in grammar, we can have things that we call implied, like the implied subject of pretty much any imperative sentence, like this one, is you. But consider there are probably between 25 and 30 million stop signs on the public roads of this country. And think about all the ones on the sides of school buses and parking garages, on private roads, in college dorm rooms. I mean, guys, it's not funny. Stop stealing road signs. Plus all the ones around the world that say things like arrêtez or alto or ting or routine, and you get the idea. Stop pretty quickly becomes the world's most ubiquitous simple sentence. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit more about the implied subject of imperative sentences, but to do it, I need to go inside to the whiteboard. Welcome back to the great indoors. Can we get the whiteboard up? Nice, thank you. I'm going to talk about our imperative sentence here by drawing a sentence diagram. I'm not really going to get into sentence diagramming in this series or really any series. Unless there's a demand for it, then I would do it. I think it's kind of fun because a grammar nerd's got a grammar nerd. But I will put down in the description some links to sites that explain sentence diagramming better than I could. But the basic of every sentence diagram is a horizontal line divided in half. On the left, we put the subject, and on the right, we put the predicate. Predicate being a fancy word for the verb and the stuff that goes with the verb or modifies the verb or is after the verb, like that. We know our verb on our stop sign, and that is stop. And on the subject line, we are going to put in parentheses the word you. That's because you is understood to be there, but those parentheses mean it's not written or it's not spoken. Because to think back to something I talked about in episode 1 of this series, to have a complete sentence, you really just need a complete thought in context. And with a word like stop, there's never a time you're looking at a stop sign and you don't understand the context. You're behind the wheel, you're sitting on your bike, you're standing on the corner waiting to cross the street, you're in some frat guy's dorm room, and you realize that the context for him is that he's insecure, he thinks that girls don't like him, and he wants to overcome that by stealing highway signs. It's a stop sign. Just don't. Boys are the worst. Anyway, that allows us to create a definition of a simple sentence that goes beyond simple sentence has just one independent clause and no other clauses. We can give a definition of a simple sentence that looks something like this. A simple sentence covers just one complete thought in context. So stop in context, perfectly fine. Many other imperatives, even go or don't stop thinking about tomorrow, perfectly understandable in context. And I apologize for putting that into your head again. I really shouldn't have after what I did to you in episode 3. But just because we now have a good working definition of a simple sentence doesn't mean our sentences have to stay simple. I mean, that definition is a technical one. There's a colloquial meaning for simple that we take as uncomplicated or short sometimes, or really easy to understand. But that's not what simple means when we talk about sentences. Simple really just means that it expresses one complete thought, and only that one complete thought in context. So we can play with our verb stop. It's got an understood subject of you, but we can keep going after the imperative verb. Take a look at this. Stop throwing your new blue plastic frisbee with the black stripes and the white circles at the female yellow Labrador retriever puppy with a red collar and silver tag with her name on it, sitting in the large, freshly cleaned bay window of my living room at the front of my 2-story red brick colonial revival house on Maple Street, just south of Emerson Avenue in the white-hot Happyvale neighborhood of Capital City, named, of course, after Irving Capital, the founder of the city, known for his fantastic hats, black 3-piece suits, and salt and pepper walrus mustache. Stop on a stop sign, one word. That long rant, 101 words. Same imperative verb, same understood subject, completely different styles of simple sentence. Now I am going to throw in a hashtag warning. If you write a sentence like that, you turn it into me, or pretty much any English teacher anywhere, you will get skewered. That is not a good sentence. That really is grumpy old man railing against the teenagers, or the youngins, or the youths, or whatever he calls them. It's just not good writing. But that doesn't mean we're stuck without the ability to adorn our simple sentences with more interesting things. We could take that stop sign and we could add a subject, like literally say, you stop. Or we could add an adverb and literally say, you stop now. It would make the signs a lot more complicated, and society's already kind of figured out what a stop sign looks like, and we don't really need to change it to make it more understandable. But when we're writing, we're not only writing imperative sentences that just have one verb. We're writing sentences that have complete thoughts. We're writing sentences that have verbs with their subjects. So you can write a simple sentence that just goes like this. Mr. Bullock teaches. There you go. You've got the subject, and you've got the verb. Nothing that needs to be understood about it. But what if we complicated that a little bit? What if we're not just talking about me? What if we write, Mr. Bullock and Mr. Morse teach? We've got there what we call a compound subject. You might remember from episode 3 when I talked about compound sentences, where you take two complete thoughts and you compound them together. A compound subject is when you take two subjects and you compound them together. Each of the two subjects, me and Mr. Morse, teach. So there's no reason to write it as two separate sentences. Mr. Bullock teaches, Mr. Morse teaches. That's kind of tiresome. You write those two sentences in a row, it's not good writing. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I bet if we could compound the subject, we could also compound the verb. And you're right. Take a look at this one. Mr. Bullock teaches and entertains. Of course I entertain. I'm a D-list local celebrity and a very, very small presence on YouTube. Please subscribe. Please tell your friends to subscribe. But yeah, we can compound the verb. And now you are probably thinking what I'm thinking. What if we compounded the subject and the verb? That would be amazing. And you're right, because it would look like this. Mr. Bullock and Mr. Morse teach and entertain. See, each one of those subjects does both of the verbs, and each one of those verbs applies to both of the subjects. You can't split that up into two separate independent clauses and call it a compound sentence, even though there are two subjects and two verbs. It has to remain a simple sentence like that. Now again, you can imagine writing 4 boring sentences in a row. Mr. Bullock teaches, Mr. Morse teaches, Mr. Bullock entertains, Mr. Morse entertains. And by that point, your audience is fast asleep. But this compound subject plus compound verb, you've got something there. And it doesn't stop with compound subjects and compound verbs. As we saw in that very long paragraph by the grumpy man about the Frisbee and his dog and his red brick colonial blah blah blah, right? We saw adverbs and adjectives and prepositional phrases and participial phrases and adverb phrases and other things like that. If you want to learn more about phrases, as I said in the previous episode, not really going to talk about phrases in this series, but in addition to the sentence diagramming links, I'm going to put some links to phrases down below in the description so you can kind of figure out all of those things that I was talking about. But the takeaway that I want you to have from this episode is that simple doesn't mean boring. Simple doesn't mean uncomplicated. Simple doesn't mean repetitive, even though I just totally used a repetitive structure there for those 3 things. But you know what? That's a rhetorical technique called anaphora. We'll get to it later. Good save, Bullock. Good save. So I hope this helps you with the simple sentence. And I hope it gives you some good ideas how, even if you don't want to get into compound or compound complex kinds of sentences, you can still write interesting sentences. You can still write very different sentences in a row, even if they all fit into the same category of simple sentence. Now, in episode 5, we will talk about the compound sentence, and then there's an episode 6, and then we're done with sentences for a little while. We will do a later series on the complex and compound complex sentence and some other things that you can do with sentences to make them more interesting, and things like periodic sentences and loose sentences and cumulative sentences and stuff. You know, we'll get there. But this is series 1. It's got to be pretty basic. So simple sentence today, compound sentence when I see you for the next one. When we're talking about grammar, we can imply subjects. Obviously, we can imply infinitives. We can imply objects of prepositions, like anytime somebody says, hey, I'm going down to the Walmart, you want to come with?